Yuta successfully fires off Hollow Purple and destroys Malevolent Shrine, but also causes Infinite Void to collapse. We see a huge wave of destruction caused by Hollow Purple and the collapse of the domains. We then see Sukuna wounded and covered in blood. Sukuna says he pulled it off. As powerful as Purple may be, he's still not fully comfortable using it. He then confirms that Yuta even destroyed his own barrier. We then see Yuji, Yuta and Todo launching themselves towards Sukuna. Todo then says it doesn't matter if we're caught in the crossfire, the second your technique recovers, drill as many purples as you can into him. We'll avoid it using Boogie Woogie. Immediately after the use of his domain expansion, Sukuna has once again fallen into a state which his cursed energy is painstakingly difficult to use. Meanwhile, we see Yuta collapse to the floor. Kenjaku's curse technique, copied by Akatsu, has also burned out after using his domain expansion. Before the 5 minutes could pass, the use of Kenjaku's technique was halted. Yuta then thinks to himself, damn it, Rikichan not haunting this body means copy is no longer mine, making Limitless burn out the technique. He thought he could keep using Kenjaku's ability for the full 5 minutes. So basically, because he's in Gojo's body using Kenjaku's technique, it's burning out his original copy technique faster because he's technically not the user of it anymore. Yuta then continues to give us more exposition within his inner monologue. Was there some trick behind Kenjaku being able to use his technique immediately following a domain expansion? I didn't take any information like that when I copied his technique. I'll at least maintain the barrier for their sake. The scene then switches to Todo facing Sukuna. Todo says that Sukuna's reached his limit. He continues to say I guess that's why they call him the King of Curses. Even in a situation like this, his offense doesn't let up. Here I am distracted by Akatsu, he won't let that opening slide. Sukuna then hits Todo with a black flash. We then see Yuji appear behind Sukuna after Todo uses Boogie Woogie. Todo, coughing up blood, says, way to make us wait, I'm not done hogging the spotlight just yet. Yuji then punches Sukuna in the face. Todo then notices bundles of Yuta's cursed energy around. He's keeping up shards of the barrier, preventing Sukuna from being able to use his cursed technique. Todo says until these shards disappear, there's no greater stage on which Boogie Woogie can shine. He then uses his curse technique and Yuji appears in every direction around Sukuna. We see Yuji hit Sukuna multiple times and then place a hand on his chest. Yuji exclaims that he'll do this as many times as it takes and then he screams to wake up Fushiguro. Yuji uses Dismantle on Sukuna and hits him directly in the soul. We see Sukuna struggling in pain as he thinks to himself. Yuji is selectively choosing the target of his technique. He's firing Dismantle after Dismantle directly at the barrier between mine and Megami's souls. We then see that Yuji has made a binding vow to make his strikes more effective at tearing Megami's body from Sukuna. Sukuna knows that he can't continue to take these hits from Yuji. Sukuna then throws up multiple fingers into his hand. He won't be able to maintain his body and he's going to lose. But we see he has another trick up his sleeve as he eats his fingers again. Sukuna jumps onto a pillar but Yuji uses Dismantle on it. As the pillar crumbles, Yuji tries to punch Sukuna but he misses. Sukuna then punches Yuji into a wall. Sukuna thinks that if he keeps dodging Yuji's Dismantle then they won't have any capable way of defeating him. Todo's Vibroslap has been taking damage throughout the battle. He says if my Vibroslap isn't recognized as my left hand, it won't continue to function, and then says just one more time. We then see Todo using his curse technique one last time. We then see Sukuna, Yuji and Todo all together surrounded by shards of Yuta's barrier. We then see Sukuna look confused as he saw Todo use his curse technique but he didn't see Yuji swap. However, at that moment, Sukuna sees Hana Caruso floating above him. Sukuna looks shocked as she's about to use Jacob's ladder to separate his soul from Megami's body. We see through a binding vow that Boogie Woogie's range has been expanded. That's why Todo could only use it one more time. We then see a flashback with Yuta and Angel. Angel says that her role ends once she dispels Gojo Satoru's seal. But then she asks Akatsu about what'll happen to Megumi. Yuta says he's sorry and he may have to rely on Angel again at the very end. Yuta then continues to talk. Just as I said earlier, it's perfectly fine for you to stay out of the battle. Even if my domain is destroyed, we'll make sure there is no need for you to fight. I'd like you to fight Jacob's ladder as the finishing blow. We'll take an all or nothing gamble once more and attempt to split Sukuna and Megumi's souls. At the very end, we'll make the most of a strong point of my copy technique. Angel then asks Yuta what he means by a strong point. Yuta explains, when dealing with my copy, no one thinks of the original user of the copied technique. For whatever reason, all they think about is what and how many techniques I have in my stock. They don't stop to think about the possibility of the original user with the same technique appearing. Especially for those who know how copy works, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking it as me as taking the technique instead of copying it. The true strength of copy is having two of the same card in our hand. We then see Hana use a maximum output Jacob's ladder directly on Sukuna. At the end of the chapter, the narrator then says that the Calling Games is going into the next phase. So at the ending of the last chapter, we saw Hana Caruso was able to hit Sukuna with Jacob's ladder. This chapter picks up where the last chapter ended, with Hana Caruso using Jacob's ladder directly on Sukuna. And the chapter is titled The Decisive Battle in the Uninhabited Demon-Infested Shinjuku. While surrounded by the light of Jacob's ladder, Sukuna punches and smashes the ground below him. Sukuna thinks to himself, unlike in Akatsu's domain where he could select the technique's target, this Jacob's ladder will hit Todo and the brat too. Sukuna then begins jumping up the ground he smashed below him. He says, if I scale this pillar of light, I'll be able to reach to the angel without any interference. So of course Sukuna has a contingency for this situation. He's attempting to kill Hana before Jacob's ladder can affect him. Sukuna nearly reaches Hana before Todo yells at her to fall back. Sukuna, thinking about Hana, says they're coexisting within that body. You are nothing but a strong technique in a weak shell. Losing one of their arms makes that fact all the more true. They aren't able to garner the same output they did back then, referring to when Hana used Jacob's ladder at the end of the Calling Games. Sukuna says, Angel, before I'm torn from Megumi Fushiguro's body, I'll end your life. Sukuna goes to attack Hana, but Todo jumps in the way and gets hit with a black flash. Sukuna, impressed with Todo, says this man is a Jujutsu sorcerer down to his very core. The force from Sukuna's black flash sends Hana and Todo flying through multiple buildings. Sukuna then says those two are out of commission. I can snuff out Angel's final breath later. The only one left standing now is the brat. We then see Yuji appear ready to attack Sukuna. Sukuna, baffled, thinks to himself, he chased me within the light despite it burning him. Yuji then smashes Sukuna in the face and then grabs him by both his ankles and throws him through a building. Sukuna somehow manages to land on his feet, but Yuji is below him using Dismantle already. Yuji goes to punch Sukuna in the face, but Sukuna is able to block it. The narrator then says because Sukuna was able to hit another black flash on Todo, the King of Curses regains his reverse curse technique at last. Sukuna says there's no need for him to take risky moves like he had to against Gojo. He then grabs Yuji and says, as things stand, all I need to do is wait for my technique to recover. This brat is no threat to my life. Yuji keeps attempting to use Dismantle on Sukuna all over the place. The Dismantle that only targets the barrier between mine and Megumi's soul. It's a lethal technique to an incarnated type like myself. Sukuna then punches Yuji in the face and then says, but then again, if it doesn't land, it's meaningless. We then see a flashback of when Yuji and Gojo were fighting Jogo together. While in Jogo's domain, Gojo says it extends a ton of cursed energy, but it has its merits. He continues to say to Yuji, first off, you get a stat boost due to the change in environment, sort of like a buff in video games. Also, curse techniques imbued within a domain are guaranteed to hit. We then see Yuji Itadori finally use his domain expansion. The narrator states, through switch training with Kusakabe, Yuji Itadori learned the fundamentals of barrier techniques. We then see Yuji and Sukuna together inside a subway station. The same subway station that's in the original opening of the anime. Sukuna is also currently inhabiting the body of Yuji Itadori, and Yuji is inhabiting his own body too. So Yuji was able to change Sukuna's entire being from his forearm state to this state. We see Sukuna sitting on a chair alone in the subway, confused. Yuji, standing above Sukuna smiling, says, "Come on Sukuna, let's go." The narration then says this decisive one-on-one heads into an uncharted domain. The chapter begins with the narration saying Itadori expands his domain. Just what is this place? We see Yuji and Sukuna going down an escalator together as Sukuna realizes what's happening and he thinks to himself, "I've experienced this before, the rare phenomenon of connecting with a sorcerer during the height of battle. I had thought that this was some kind of side effect due to cursed energy being born from humans." And to be honest, this is kind of reminiscent of Naruto and Sasuke being top ninja and having their moment, but whatever. Sukuna, looking disturbed, says, "Yet this is something different. What is this? Your domain?" Yuji responds to Sukuna grimacing, saying, "Shut it. I did this a little frantically. I don't really get what's happening either. I wanted some time to talk to you, Sukuna, so just indulge me for a sec." We see Yuji and Sukuna walking through the city of Sendai together, and it seems as if Yuji's domain has been able to encapsulate an entire city from his memories alone. We don't know if Yuji's domain expansion has a barrier, or if it's barrierless, or if they've just teleported somewhere else, but I'd say it's similar to what Sukuna did at the start of the series with Shrine. Sukuna originally defeated Yuji in the dimension of their souls when they made their original deal. Except Yuji's ability over the manipulation of souls has allowed him to bring Sukuna into his world instead. Yuji's domain expansion takes you to the place where your soul resides. Returning to the chapter, Yuji and Sukuna are walking through Sendai as Yuji tells Sukuna to check out the Demon Sword dance statue. Sukuna just says wouldn't know it, to which Yuji responds, "Don't worry, no one besides the locals would." Sukuna and Yuji enter an underground passageway together as Yuji continues to talk. "I was raised here until I was 6, maybe 7, and then I moved to Sendai. I was born there, but we moved back for Gramps' work. So I guess they're not in Sendai at the moment, probably in Tokyo, but who cares. I came back here for the first time in like 10 years, for a funeral. It was a friend of my grandpa's. I wouldn't say it was a ghost town now, but it did surprise me how empty the place felt." Yuji then corrects himself and says, "Actually, I guess I wasn't surprised. If I'm being honest, I kind of expected it. It didn't really shake me." Sukuna is speechless as Yuji just won't shut up. "I wonder if that guy would have come to my grandpa's funeral if my grandpa had died first." I find it interesting that Yuji keeps making reference to his grandfather's friend like he might be a relevant character in some regard. Yuji's domain doesn't only allow others to see his memories, but allows Yuji to walk through his own memories himself. And I know for a fact Yuji definitely has a vital piece of information that we as readers don't know. Yuji and Sukuna continue to go to different places together. Yuji says, "This is the park where I spent most of my time. There's pretty much no play equipment left, but I thought I was gonna die once after stubbing my toe on the swing set, so I'm not too mad about it. One time, I used this fountain to try and rinse some sand off my slime I dropped in the sandbox, but the whole thing went down the drain and I just started crying." Sukuna just laughs blankly as Yuji continues to talk smack. They walk over to some flowers and Yuji says a morning glory, to which Sukuna corrects him and says that's a hydrangea, you moron. Yuji says yeah I know, it was just a careless mistake. Yuji, continuing to talk, says, "A ton of these bloom here, huh? I really only noticed after I moved away. I wonder who's in charge of deciding all the foliage for each town." Yuji then turns to Sukuna with a smirk on his face and says, "Wait, you're into flowers?" Sukuna rebukes this and says he only knows because of Fushiguro's memories. Yuji, not believing him, says, "Oh yeah, sure. Wait, wouldn't that mean you know all about this place from my memories when you were in my body?" Sukuna says, "I didn't waste my time reading through each piece of meaningless drivel." Yuji once again says right, not believing Sukuna at all. They go to a river together and Yuji says, "This park was pretty far from my house, but you can catch crayfish here." Yuji tells Sukuna to try it out, unless the strongest sorcerer in history can't catch some crayfish. Sukuna tells Yuji to silence and takes him up on his challenge. They then begin arguing over who has the better crayfish, with Sukuna saying yours is practically microscopic, and then Yuji responding with you got an American crayfish, Japanese ones are way more rare. Sukuna arcs up and says what was that, and Yuji says you heard me. This is the department store that opened when I was 5. Thanks to this, all the independent shops vanished. It kinda got quiet with every small business closing down, but they opened a movie theatre upstairs, so I considered it even. It's a pretty grey place, but don't worry, there's a lot more green once you leave town a bit. Sukuna, seemingly with his defences down, says I'm not exactly holding my breath for anything here. Sukuna and Yuji reach a field together and Yuji says, see, green as far as the eye can see. I used to catch grasshoppers in the fields here until the cage was about to burst. Haven't seen many of them lately though, maybe the pesticides have gotten stronger. Sukuna, seemingly getting impatient, says is this going anywhere? Yuji says just hold on, I still have some places I want to go. We see a horse as Yuji says wow, horses are so awesome, no matter how many times I see them their heads are bigger than I remember. My grandpa took me to this farm every so often. I guess now that I think about it, he did a lot of parenting in my mum and dad's place. And I don't know about that, Kenjaku seemed like a pretty good mum. He seemed to have a pretty good long-term plan in place for him. They go to another closed down store together and Yuji says the soft serve here is killer. I spent my whole allowance on it here one day, but then I ate too much and I threw up. Sukuna says so you were born stupid? Ignoring him, Yuji says oh let's do some archery. Sukuna hits a bullseye and Yuji says something about playing with you isn't really enticing me. Sukuna just says bluntly isn't it obvious I'll be more accustomed to this than you? And then Yuji says alright I forgot you're from the era of actual archery. And just quickly, if you enjoy the latest JJK spoilers and full chapter reviews, remember to like, comment and subscribe, it really does help boost this stuff in the algorithm. Alright, let's get straight back to it. The scene then switches as we see it snowing, and Yuji says you'd see snow sculpture after snow sculpture lined up here during our snow festival in the winter. I wonder if they still do that now. It's the same in Sendai, but it never really snows there. It just doesn't feel like winter unless the snow really piles up. We then see Yuji as a kid as he says, I always loved drinking sweet milk tea after my hands went numb from shoveling snow in the morning. My grandpa always looked stunned by it for some reason. Once it got closer to Christmas, I would hear the bells at night. That always made me think Santa really did exist. I only realised way later in life it was just the snow chains on the car tyres. Sukuna then interjects and says alright, I've had enough. And Yuji says okay, I think I've showed you pretty much everything I wanted to anyway. Sukuna says your blathering is disgusting. Just hurry up and say what it is you want to say. Yuji says you know, up until recently, I thought I should simply live my life to fulfill my role as I understood it. I thought if I died like that, I could at least consider it a proper death. But now, I feel like that's not entirely true. Walking the dog, raising a family, any sort of role like that is just fine. Even if you don't have anything like that, as long as you can eat and sleep, even if you're stuck in bed, even if you spent your life with no connections and nothing remains of you. More than memories made, it's within the little tiny fragments that remain drifting off where the value of life lies. It never had anything to do with the way people die. I could just never forgive those who act as if value doesn't exist. Sukuna, I loathe you. Humans aren't tools. We aren't born with any set role. Which is to say, I don't know. I don't know whether humans are fundamentally good or evil. I could very well be doing the wrong thing here, so I thought I should at least let you see the humanity of someone other than yourself, of someone you see no value in. Sukuna stares blankly at Yuji and says I don't feel a thing. I understand everything you're saying, Brat, and yet it stirs no emotion within me. Just as you felt when you saw how quiet this town had become. You had expected this. I feel absolutely nothing. Yuji just says, no dice, huh? Yeah, I figured. Suffice to say, I am dumbfounded by your cowardice, your rage toward me, your hatred. Is this all it amounted to? Sukuna then realizes and says to Yuji, wait, could it be? Are you pitying me? Is this your way of showing compassion? Exactly. Sukuna, I can kill you. Release Megami. If you return to my body, I'll spare your life. Sukuna, enraged with his teeth clenched, says such a gravely severe misconception. I won't stop at simply mincing you to bits, Brad. Right in front of your eyes, I'll slaughter each and every human being you claim to be oh so valuable. The chapter ends with the narration saying a refusal burning red with fury. The chapter begins with Megami telling Yuji that that's enough. The narration says Itadori is all ears inside Fushiguro's soul as Yuji listens to Megami's words. Megami says, I wanted to create a world where Sukumi wouldn't have to suffer needlessly. Or at the very least, I wanted to preserve our fragile life as much as I possibly could. Simple things like eating home-cooked meals, watching sunbeams fall onto our hanged laundry, seeing her off as she walked beside someone like you, Itadori. That would have been true happiness to me. Megami then says, but I've had enough, as Yuji looks at him and responds with his own words. Yuji says to Megami, early on when my grandfather first got sick with lung cancer, he was offered a rough treatment that would have come with strong side effects, so he turned it down. Maybe he thought his body was strong enough even without the treatment. Every so often I'd hear about euthanasia, but that didn't seem right. It felt like someone else's choice. Deep down I'd always felt distant, unrelated. I figured it must suck for them, but I'll be fine. Ever since coming to Jujutsu High, I've been flooded with all these awful thoughts. And when I think about lasting forever, I find myself able to empathize with my grandfather or with anyone faced with a helpless situation. That's why I can't tell you to keep living. And obviously that's some pretty heavy stuff, and I think it's personally a pretty strong philosophical conundrum. But I'm not going to delve any deeper into that into a YouTube video for, obvious reasons. The chapter then switches back to reality as we see Sukuna in Yuji's domain, and he uses Hollow Wicker Basket in order to counter it because he doesn't have enough cursed energy to use his domain. Still being in Yuji's domain, we see them fighting in all the places that were referenced in Yuji's past, which makes for some really cool looking panels in this fight. Sukuna has to keep his hand sign together in order to make Hollow Wicker Basket strong enough to withstand Yuji's domain. So he only really has one free hand at the moment. Yuji forcefully moves himself towards Sukuna's position as Sukuna thinks to himself, I'd use Gojo's method to reset a burnt out technique within her domain, but the risk is too great with the after effects of unlimited void persisting. However, Sukuna continues. In contrast to a domain where one actualizes a mental image, the output required for techniques like Hollow Wicker Basket or simple domains is little. It allows a sorcerer to buy time until the sure hit technique imbued with a domain hits them, but eventually, without fail, they will be overpowered. However, Sukuna is able to supplement that output by maintaining the hand sign even after Hollow Wicker Basket's activation. This allows him to continue fighting without being overpowered within a domain, which I noticed and referenced earlier, but I'm glad the chapter went out of its way to explain it. In simple terms, Sukuna is able to withstand Yuji's domain because he has 4 arms. We then see birds fly away within Yuji's domain as Sukuna and Yuji trade blows with each other. Sukuna grabs Yuji and punches him in the face, then Yuji tries to counter him, but Sukuna's too quick and punches Yuji again, knocking him really far away. Sukuna then laughs and says, "Colour me surprised. Who would have thought that being looked down upon would fill me with such ire? That being pitied would rouse such hatred? What fun it will be for every other human to reap the consequences of your actions." The chapter then switches to a flashback with Megami as a kid, except it's within Yuji's domain. It's the same memory Megami had with Gojo, except Yuji is in his place this time. Kid Megami then turns to Yuji and asks, "What's with that face?" Yuji, holding back tears, says it's just, "It'll be so lonely without you, Fushiguro." Suddenly the chapter switches back to Sukuna's perspective within Yuji's domain. He's shocked as his leg begins to be swallowed by shadows. Sukuna then thinks to himself, my 10 Shadows technique stopped functioning after Maharaga was destroyed. This has to be Megami Fushiguro's. His soul was submerged in the bath, and yet that brat's dismantle breathed new life into it. Yuji then appears out of nowhere and smashes Sukuna in the face and sends him flying. Yuji then smiles to himself as he realizes Megami's beginning to fight back. Yuji then rushes Sukuna and punches him in the face again, and Sukuna has to keep his hands signed together to keep Hollow Wicker Basket active. They begin brawling with each other, with both of them finding success. They each take turns grabbing one another and punching each other in the face. Yuji, however, begins getting the upper hand and continues hitting Sukuna with Dismantle. Sukuna thinks to himself, his strikes have an effect I can't overcome with the reverse curse technique. He'll take Hollow Wicker Basket and shatter it. But in that moment, the curse tool Yuji had equipped to his hand shatters instead. Yuji then realizes he was hit with Cleave. As he thinks to himself, Sukuna's technique recovered, that's Gojo Sensei's. He was able to recover his burnt out cursed energy. Sukuna, smirking, suddenly uses his domain expansion but is quickly grabbed by Yuji. Sukuna then notices two of Yuji's fingers are missing. We see a finger tied up in a room with a large spiral staircase. Did Yuji turn his own fingers into cursed objects like Kanjaku did for Sukuna? The chapter then ends with the narration saying, what does this finger mean? Next week, the decisive battle in Shinjuku reaches its climax. The chapter begins with a flashback of Gojo and Yuta doing switch training together. Gojo in Yuta's body says to Yuta and Gojo's body, you want me to give you Sukuna's last finger? To which Yuta responds, oh dude, you're hiding it somewhere, aren't you? If we feed it to Rika-chan, I can copy Sukuna's shrine. Yuta continues, even if we swapped bodies like this, I can't read your memories. Gojo responds with, that's a hard pass. Could you take this a little more seriously? Yuta says he's as serious as they come. Gojo then goes on to explain why he rejected Yuta's proposition. Sure, that would meet the conditions of your technique, that's a 20th of Sukuna's finger after all, but if your goal is to analyze Shrine and its techniques, that won't be enough. Yuta says that's true, if I didn't have Inumaki-kun to help me with cursed speech, there's a ton I wouldn't have known. Then we see a panel of Yuta and Inumaki where Yuta is learning that he can use cursed speech through a phone. Gojo says I don't think it's a good idea to lose our connection to Sukuna here, to which Yuta responds, let me put it how Hikari would, we'll take a gamble, the fever or something like that, which is a perfect response because Hikari is the best character. And with this being the last chapter of the fight against Sukuna, I wonder if he'll get filled in with what happened with Urumei and Hikari. I can see Urumei being a good tool for exposition to explain more about Sukuna at the end of the series. Getting on with the chapter, Gojo says here's what you ought to do if you want to copy Shrine. Yuta then goes on to explain how the copy curse technique works. In order to copy a curse technique, I have to have Rika-chan ingest a portion of the target's body. The required body part and amount depends on what I'm trying to copy, and this dictates how many times I can use the technique, meaning the stronger the technique, the more lethal the body part required. Yuta continues, however, even if she doesn't ingest a lethal portion of the target's body, I can meet the conditions by entering a binding vow limiting the amount of uses of the technique. Yuji, listening into the conversation, asks what if your opponent uses reverse curse technique? For example, what would happen if you took Gojo's arm to copy Limitless and then he restored it? Yuji continues, that way you could at least copy Gojo and Inumaki's techniques. They'll feel a little pinch, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Yuta then clarifies that Yuji's recommendation is in fact not possible. Yuta says the instant a consumed body part regenerates, its value within the technique becomes 0 and ceases to meet the copy's requirements. Inumaki and Hana's arms can't be healed with modern science or reverse curse techniques, so they let me use them. Yuji is then disappointed by this information. The chapter then shows that Yuta consumed a rib from Charles, Hikari's original opponent in the Calling Games. Hikari promises to heal his rib after the fight with Sukuna is finished. Mei then asks Yuta, are you sure about this? You heard what Todo said about their resonance, did you not? So Sukuna and Yuji instinctively know a lot of information about each other because of the connection of their souls. Yuta responds with, I know, that's why we'll only try this immediately before we fight Sukuna. I'll judge what the minimum necessary information is and then I'll tell Itadori-kun. You can never be too careful. Even if Yuji and Sukuna's resonance can detect a big physical change, you shouldn't be able to tell what Yuji is thinking or what information he has. Mei then asks Yuta how he can be sure, and he says it's because Yuji can't read Sukuna's thoughts. Yuta continues, if everything is in disarray after Gojo fights Sukuna, I don't think we'll be found out. But more than anything, I don't want to make Yuji lose his composure right before a fight. Yuta says to Yuji, even if you can't use it right now, Sukuna's curse technique is already etched into your body. Gojo already confirmed this information with his 6 eyes. Which is also why I think Gojo was so quick to accept Yuji as Sukuna's vessel, because he was able to see Yuji's compatibility with Sukuna from the very beginning using his 6 eyes. The chapter then returns to the present with Yuji and Sukuna fighting within Yuji's domain. Sukuna sees Yuji's hands and thinks to himself, the brat's fingers, he's missing 2 of them. When I transferred my soul to Megami's body, I only removed Yuji's little finger, so he shouldn't be missing 2 fingers, however that doesn't look like a fresh wound. Then Sukuna remembers Yuta's words and says you weren't able to retrieve your final finger, were you? Then Sukuna realizes that he's been tricked this entire time. This whole entire time he thought Yuta had ingested his last finger in order to copy his cleave ability. However, he actually used Yuji's finger in order to copy cleave instead of Sukuna's. The chapter then switches perspective to Urahime and Gakuganji in a large room with Sukuna's last finger. Gakuganji says to Urahime the special grade cursed object, Sukuna's finger. It can withstand any attack, be it by Jujutsu or force. Urahime then asks Gakuganji, but can it negate a curse technique? Urahime says perhaps with a binding vow, if we stop trying to destroy it and only focus on allowing a curse technique to pass through, then maybe. But there's something else I'm more worried about. Urahime continues and says it hasn't even been half an hour since she's woken up. The chapter then switches to Kugasaki Nobara. It turns out her death was a total fake out and she's alive and well, albeit she is missing an eye. Nobara, making a return to the series, grinning, simply says, let's see some smiles, boys. We then begin to see Nobara instantly use her curse technique Resonance on Sukuna's finger. With the aforementioned binding vow in place, she uses Resonance to smash Sukuna's finger. We then see Sukuna's body convulse as multiple wounds appear. Sukuna begins to freak out after being hit with Resonance. As he's momentarily incapacitated from the attack, he thinks to himself, it's that girl, this is bad, my technique, I can't open my domain. The brat's sure hit effect is going to land at this rate. Nobara, after damaging Sukuna, says, how's that for a Popeye, you damn idiot. Yuji is grinning as he too recognizes Nobara's attack and realizes that she's okay. Yuji then proceeds to hit Sukuna with his soul dismantle. Sukuna is taking too many hits to be able to process what's happening and begins throwing up fingers. Sukuna, his body wounded and breaking, says this isn't over. Sukuna then manages to punch Yuji in the stomach, knocking him back. Sukuna enraged says, you think you can flay me with this superficial domain? Sukuna says to Yuji, you haven't even been using reverse curse technique to heal your wounds, you've surpassed your limit long ago. We see Yuji battered and bleeding and covered in wounds. Sukuna continues, the vast amount of cursed energy you've expended with this domain means you're the one on the ropes. Sukuna manages to punch Yuji in the face, however Yuji stands firm. Sukuna's then confused as he takes massive damage, and he realizes Yuji's last punch had a double impact after a time lag. We see Yuji look into Sukuna's eye as Yuji says, Sukuna, it's time we end this cycle of curses. Yuji then powers up a massive punch reminiscent of how he used to fight at the beginning of the series. We then see Sukuna's eyes go white and roll into the back of his head as he's hit with a massive black flash. The narration then says, ringing the bell on a long fight. And that's the end of the Shinjuku Showdown arc and the end of the fight with Sukuna. Apparently there are 4 more chapters after this, which I find interesting because I know the original plan was to have an arc after this fight with Sukuna. However, if this is the end of the series, I reckon the next few chapters are gonna fill in what happened with the fight between Urame and Hikari. It'll also reveal what Ui has been doing, transporting everyone's bodies, which I think is a tactic to manipulate the calling games into ending. However, after this chapter, Megami's going to return and we're gonna have the original trio back. And personally, I think it'd be a massive shame to not have one last fight with Megami, Yuji and Nobara all together again. However, I know that the series ending is more than a rumour, but I do hope that it's another fake out. Just because I do believe that Akutami is a very good writer, and there's a few things he's put into motion that I think would violate basic writing philosophies if he doesn't continue with it. The biggest mistake Akutami could make is not showing us Kenjaku's final vision with his Tengen orb. Kenjaku clearly stated when he was dying that his will would be carried on. The orb that Kenjaku created was then absorbed by Sukuna. So if the series doesn't end in 4 chapters, who's going to be the one to carry on Kenjaku's will? And the basis for the barrier that Kenjaku created for the calling games was idol transfiguration powered by Mahiro's curse. So this unknown entity that has been collecting energy throughout the entire calling games is actually Mahiro in my opinion. And I believe Akutami has to show us what the collection of this cursed energy actually does because he's already teased it to us. Anyway, like and subscribe and comment below what you think about the end of the series. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much.